In this episode, a Canadian town is subjected to a spate of cougar attacks, which ends in tragedy. But there is something unusual about the final attack. A young woman was taken in broad daylight. Footprints in the snow reveal that she was stalked and then pounced upon by the cougar as she cross-country skied through Banff National Park. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying cougar attack on Frances Frost. Welcome to Final Affliction. 30-year-old Frances Frost lived in Canmore in Alberta, Canada, situated 50 miles west of Calgary and near the border of Banff National Park. The area boasts world-class trails for cross-country skiers. One of those cross-country skiers was Frances. She and her family frequented the trails during the winter. A particular favorite was the Cascade Fire Road. She had lived in her parents' condo in Canmore for 5 years with her family, which included Frances, her brother Ken, and sister Amy. They spent Christmas there together every year, enjoying the beautiful winter slopes as a family. This year would be their last. During their stay, her parents had been out on the cross-country trail twice, each time describing the beauty of it and the perfect conditions for skiing, but Frances hadn't been able to leave the home to join them. Over the Christmas period in 2000, she was plagued by a cold. Only in the new year did she start to feel better, and on January 2, 2001, she decided to head outside for some fresh air. Her parents headed back to their home in Edmonton. Frances gave each of them a warm hug goodbye. That same afternoon, she ventured out onto the Cascade Fire Road to experience the perfect conditions her parents had been raving about. She clipped on her cross-country skis and set off from the car park. It felt good to be outside and to breathe the icy air after being ill for so long. She could feel her body reviving itself as she glided over the white snow. She beamed at some locals she knew as she slid past, but Frances was gliding into danger. There had been a spike in cougar activity in the area recently. The elk had been drawn nearer to town and the mountain lions had followed. That very same day, hours before Frances's outing, a cougar had stalked an Alaskan husky outside its home. At 3 a.m. and under cover of darkness, the cougar crept closer to the unsuspecting dog and pounced on it at the last second. There was a loud shriek from the dog, and the commotion as the two animals tussled woke the dog's owner. When they rushed outside, they managed to scare the cougar off and tend to their wounded pooch. The dog lived to bark another day, but more was to come. 3 hours later, just after 6 a.m., Cheryl Hyde took her schnauzer for a walk. It was dark outside. The air was cold. The only sound was the crunch of snow underfoot and the occasional roar as a car rolled past. But in the stillness of the early morning, a predator lurked. It was on the hunt. When Cheryl thought she heard a footstep behind her, she wheeled around. There, to her shock, was a cougar following her. It wouldn't take its eyes off her. The faster she walked, the faster it walked, but it was gaining on her. She tried to remain calm and resist the urge to run. Then she came to a dead end. She backed up against a neighbor's fence, turning to face the cougar. It hissed at her and crunched down low. Unable to move and pinned up against the fence, Cheryl screamed for help. Gary Doyle raced outside and saw the cougar just 3 feet from Cheryl in a crouched position, ready to strike. Gary ran at the cat and scared it off. It had been a lucky escape, and Gary received an award for his bravery. The Cascade Fire Road that Frances was skiing along was a relatively easy route. It was a straightforward out-and-back track that was deemed suitable for all families. Often receiving early-season snow in the winter and the first to be track set, it was popular and could be busy. The trail wound through the conifer forest along the Cascade River. A narrow wooden bridge took skiers over to the other side of the river and onto a ranger cabin. Many turned around at the bridge, but a few continue, making the route harder and much longer. Frances had set off just after noon. She had turned around on her route as intended and was heading back to her car. It had been a pleasant run with few people along the trail, but now, just 300 meters from her car, She was being stalked by a cougar. It had sensed Frances whilst out hunting and had homed in on her position. Now it lay in wait for her, crouched behind a tree that lined the track. It didn't move a muscle. It didn't make a sound. Its ears pricked as it heard the sound of skis sliding over the glistening snow, the sound growing louder. Frances wasn't only a keen outdoors woman and nature lover, she was also well known in the performing arts. She was a dancer at Edmonton's Ballet North Dance School and Performing Company, and was honored to hold the role of dancer-in-residence at the Banff Centre. Hidden in the shadows, the cougar waited for the opportune moment to pounce. Just as Frances had passed by, it leapt onto her back, its muscular limbs latching onto the young woman, its mouth agape. The 60-kilogram, 130-pound feline knocked Frances off her feet and sent her flying to the ground. Her face hit the icy snow, but she died in a matter of seconds. There was no way she could fight off the 2-meter male once it had locked its jaws onto the back of her neck. She may not have even known what had hit her. The cougar then stood, panting over Frances's lifeless body. The swishing sound of skis appeared once more. It was another skier on the trail. He spotted the cougar and Frances on the ground and sped off to get help. As he passed other people, he warned them about the cougar and ushered them away in the opposite direction. Panic gripped the community as news of the tragedy spread. Park ranger arrived at the scene minutes later, where the cougar was still protecting its kill. They raised a rifle and pulled the trigger. The cougar fell to the ground. The attack made headlines the next day, but the young woman couldn't be identified. Her father had picked up the national newspaper back home in Edmonton. He couldn't believe the headline stating that a 30-year-old woman had been killed by a cougar in Banff. His heart leapt in his chest, and he called out to his wife. The two of them read the article in disbelief. Terrified that it might be their daughter, Mr. Frost called her. There was no answer. He left a message. "Franny, I know it's not you. Give me a call." Frances hadn't been carrying any formal identification on her. All that she had in one of her pockets was a card from the Banff Centre, where she was a dancer-in-residence. Police managed to find out who she was, and that evening they headed to Edmonton. There was a knock on her parents' door. It was the police, coming to deliver the terrible news. They had had their suspicions because the description of the woman in the newspaper had sounded just like Frances. They had been trying to get in touch with her all day, but had failed. Her mother knew how tired Frances had been after suffering from the seasonal flu over the Christmas period, and has since wondered whether that played any part in what happened. Had the cougar sensed that Frances was easy prey, and perhaps in a weakened state? Nobody can know for sure why the cougar attacked Frances. She had tragically been in the wrong place at the wrong time. An hour or two earlier or later may have resulted in a different ending. It's rare for cougars to attack people unprovoked. A year and a half earlier, 150 habituated elk had been moved from the area to allow the ecosystem to recover. They provided food for the cougars, so the attack could have been driven by hunger. But there were known to still be significant numbers of elk in the area. A recent wolf pack had settled in the area and may have been competing with the cougars for elk, driving cougars closer to the town. Even so, it still remained an incredibly unusual incident. It was not thought to be the same cougar involved with the incidents earlier in the day. Head ranger of Banff National Park, Ian Syme, said that a daylight attack by a cougar is rare. An attack on a human is even more rare, and a lethal attack on a human is unheard of in Alberta. This was a first. Locals and visitors alike were shocked by the attack. Officials told people to walk their dogs during daylight hours and to stay on well-lit roads. Those who ventured out into the national park to hike or ski should do so only in groups. Families kept their children indoors immediately after the tragedy, and some were too afraid to leave their homes. Until his failing health caught up with him, Frances's father and mother skied the Cascade Fire Road every year in memory of their daughter. Despite the increase of cougars in the area, many residents still ski the exact path where Frances met her terrifying final affliction.